PTSD, salient vision, this slide shows salient features versus genuine versus malingered PTSD. And there are different strategies for really looking at PTSD with malingered, or with our troops in essence. You can read this to yourself. I don't necessarily need it to read it to you, but I did want to pull out a couple of them. Combat stories. People with real PTSD don't necessarily want to talk about it. They avoid the situation and they don't want to get into it. Whereas people who are malingering PTSD relish in telling you the gory details. This was no more salient to me than I had this gentleman who was Native American, who had never been evaluated, but for some reason, I guess made the reception center screeners' hackles raise, and so they referred them to me. He had very, very restricted affect. He participated in the interview giving clipped answers. And then toward the end of the interview, after denying any symptoms, he said, "I need to know if I'm crazy." That's always a red flag for me. And I'm like, okay. And he told me in the most detached way that he had been having some problems since he saw his buddy's brains get blown out. And that was the hackles that raised for me, because I'm like, wow. And he didn't go into a lot of detail, but he did express that he was having problems anytime he heard any kind of loud sounds. He found himself jumping, and he couldn't stop dreaming about it, and he hasn't gotten a good night's sleep in about 3 years. And I asked him about his hobbies, and he said he used to fish, he used to go race cars, used to ride his motorcycle, and he doesn't do any of that anymore. And so I have seen a lot of guys come in and say, "Oh yeah, doc, I have PTSD," and blah, blah, blah. And yet they have hobbies, they have lives, and they're willing to get into all of the gory details of all of the stuff that they've supposedly seen or experienced. Someone with true PTSD will not. So I think that was one of my few experiences with someone who had true PTSD. Did he want to be part in the mental health system? Absolutely not. Did not want to have us dealing with him. But I gave him experience. I told him some of my experience would be for him to go out and get some help on. So speaking of malingering, and someone asks about the tests that are used, the tests used more than 50% of the time are these. And we're going to go over these in a little bit more detail. I've actually had permissions from MHS, PAR, and Pearson to go into a little bit more detail about each of these. So the SIRS is often used 28% of the time, the test memory malingering, VIP, Ray 15, and but really quick, one more thing on malingering. Use of the term malingering in reports, as we've already talked about, 41% of people, of forensic psychologists, and one specific, I think this was Lally, survey said that they rarely use the term. 12% say they never use the term, and 80% say that they use other terms like results were invalid, inconsistent, or there's indications of exaggeration or whatnot. One, it comes down to where you're working. If your supervisor says don't use the term malingering, there you go. But two, if you're working on your own as a forensic psychologist, then or evaluator, then it really comes down to your own style and what you feel comfortable with. You don't necessarily have to use the term malingering or even diagnose it, but you can, and you can talk in terms of inconsistencies and feigning or exaggeration or whatnot. If I were on the street and doing my private practice or SSI evaluations, and I think that it's meant, if it adds to the report, I absolutely do put the diagnosis.